Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before starting the video, please subscribe and keep watching for more detailed videos. You might think a Hallmark and Star Trek crossover would be some kind of cheesy space romance or holiday special. But what's actually happening is far more subtle. A blending of fandom, merchandising, and nostalgia, rather than a story where Kirk falls in love under a Christmas tree. Today, we dive into how Hallmark and Star Trek have quietly crossed over, not in plot, but in ornaments, collectibles, and branding, and why that crossover tells us a lot about fandom, commerce, and how franchises expand. Let me take you on a journey where sci-fi and sentimentality intersect. Over 30 years ago, Hallmark made a bold move. In 1991, they released a keepsake ornament of the USS Enterprise. That moment marked the beginning of a yearly tradition, one where Star Trek would become a staple in Hallmark's holiday lineup. What might have seemed like a novelty turned into a cultural bridge. Suddenly, Trekkies and Hallmark collectors had a shared space, the Christmas tree. Over the decades, Hallmark expanded the Star Trek line beyond just the ship. They began introducing character ornaments, Spock, Kirk, Data, with lights, sound, and little touches that reference memorable scenes. Those ornaments became gifts, display pieces, and conversation starters, small bits of fandom you could hang on your tree. Each year's release is anticipated, dissected, and debated by fans and collectors alike. In 2025, Hallmark's Star Trek collection doesn't just revisit ships and characters, they're bringing new layers of surprise. This year's lineup includes a Lower Decks 2-pack, Guinan from The Next Generation, and a hologram Janeway from Star Trek Prodigy. They also introduced the Titan A as a ship ornament, and perhaps most interestingly, a full-size ornament modeled after the old Star Trek Strategic Operations Simulator arcade game, complete with light and sound. It's a meta-nod. The crossover is not between storylines, but between nostalgia and branding, between toy culture and sci-fi lore. What's clever here is that Hallmark isn't trying to produce a Star Trek movie or reimagine the canon. They're not trying to shoehorn Picard into a holiday tale. Instead, Hallmark leverages the emotional weight of Star Trek, the memories, the fandom devotion, and packages it as a gift experience. That's the real crossover. Hallmark's emotional tradition meets the deep emotional resonance Star Trek holds for fans. To understand why this is compelling, we need to look at what the crossover isn't. It doesn't pretend to be part of the Star Trek narrative, doesn't claim canonical weight, nor does it attempt to disrupt the stories fans love. It doesn't ask you to accept strange plot twists, like Spock suddenly celebrating Christmas on Vulcan. The crossover happens in the ancillary space, the merchandising, the cultural memory, the fandom rituals. Let's pause on that. Fandom rituals. For many fans, holidays, traditions, and collecting go hand in hand. Hallmark is masterful at sentimental moments. Be there. However, whenever. Forever. The pairing of that sentiment with Star Trek's iconic imagery amplifies both. You get the emotional warmth of a holiday ornament and the nostalgic charge of seeing your favorite starship hanging from the same branch as your family's memories. Consider the Data with Spot ornament. It's clever. It references a specific Next Generation moment, a moment many fans recall fondly. When you push the button, you hear Data recite a poem about Spot, his cat. That small detail carries emotional weight for fans, and Hallmark packages it as a keepsake. That's a crossover in miniature. Narrative, emotion, and merchandise entwined. Another interesting dimension. Hallmark occasionally ties into conventions and fandom events, producing limited or exclusive items that appeal to the collector community. Over time, some of these editions become rare, collectible, even investments. The crossover becomes not only emotional but commercial. From Hallmark's point of view, Star Trek is a reliable franchise with a passionate fan base, perfect for ongoing ornament lines. In many ways, this partnership is a textbook case in brand synergy. Hallmark gains access to passionate sci-fi fans. Star Trek gets more presence in everyday life spaces, homes, holiday traditions, gift culture. It broadens its cultural footprint without forcing narrative tie-ins. The aesthetic and emotional resonance do the work. But there's more nuance. The 2025 collection's surprise, the arcade machine ornament, is symbolic. It nods to a past era of Star Trek gaming, bridging fandom memory. It's a crossover across time, not just franchises. It's Hallmark saying, we know your memories. We tap into them. The crossover, then, is multidimensional, between genres, decades, and types of fandom. So we're left asking, why does this matter? First, it blurs the line between fan product and artifact of emotion. Hallmark is selling more than resin and lights. They're selling sentiment, shared memory, nostalgia. And Star Trek's image carries emotional capital. When you hang that ornament, it's not just decoration. It's a micro-ritual linking you to the show, to fandom, to past holiday seasons. Second, it shows how franchises can expand without narrative dilution. Many fans resist forced crossovers or gimmicky expansions. But here, Hallmark doesn't ask fans to suspend disbelief. It doesn't rewrite Starfleet. It simply presents Star Trek as part of your holiday space. That's a softer form of integration, arguably more sustainable. Third, it demonstrates how brands monetize fandom through emotional touchpoints. As collectible lines deepen, each year's release becomes part of an ongoing cycle: anticipation, speculation, purchase, display, discussion. That cycle is familiar among fandom communities, and Hallmark is inserting itself into that cycle. The crossover is participation in that economy. We can also see it as a mirror to what Star Trek does, exploring hope, identity, connection. Star Trek is less about spaceships than about what it means to be human. Hallmark is less about cards than about connection. So there is a thematic alignment. The crossover works because Hallmark's ethos dovetails with Star Trek's thematic core. It is instructive to compare to other crossovers that are story-driven, say comics where Star Trek meets X-Men or Transformers. Those are explicit narrative interminglings. But Hallmark's crossover is subtler, quieter. It doesn't demand new plot threads. It happens in the real world, in decorations and marketing. It meets fans where they live. Another good comparison is the Those Old Scientists episode, a crossover within the Trek universe between Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks. That is an in-canon interaction, where characters cross timelines and narrative styles collide. It's bold, story-heavy, and requires suspension. But Hallmark's crossover is the opposite: quiet, ambient, non-disruptive, yet powerful. Let me walk you through how a fan might interact with this crossover over a typical season. First, they read a blog or fan site headline: Hallmark's 2025 Star Trek ornaments revealed. Their interest is piqued. They explore the catalog. They see new characters, new ships, maybe a game arcade. They debate which one to pre-order. They share mock-ups on social media, discuss paint details, packaging, sound effects, versus previous lines. Then, when the package arrives, they unwrap it, hang it on the tree, maybe take a photo. They share it online, tag fellow fans, compare shelves, compare versions. Some will keep it pristine in packaging. Others will display it prominently in a Star Trek corner. The ornament becomes part of their fandom performative space. In short, the crossover becomes live. It becomes part of a fan's seasonal rhythm. It enters their everyday environment, which is what many true crossovers rarely achieve. Because usually crossovers stay in story space, this one extends into daily life. Throughout, Hallmark retains control. They control release dates, packaging, exclusives, sound features, lights. Fans can respond, speculate, criticize, but the creative decisions remain with Hallmark and CBS/Paramount licensing. It's a managed, negotiated crossover, not a narrative fan project. Also noteworthy, the crossover evolves. It isn't frozen in time. The annual releases change. New characters, new ships, new gimmicks. In 2024, for example, Hallmark had a Quag caricature-style Kirk, part of a broader stylistic push. The brand experiments within the crossover space. And in 2025, the arcade format shows that experimentation continues. The crossover is not monolithic. It changes with multimedia and nostalgia trends. Let's also reflect on potential criticism. Some might see this as over-commercialization. Star Trek used as branding for resin figures. Others might say this dilutes the seriousness of the franchise. But the counterpoint is, fans are willing participants in the economy of merchandise. Many already collect figures, models, Funko Pops, art prints. Hallmark's crossover is simply another facet of that. Another critique, the crossover is asymmetrical. It brings Star Trek into Hallmark space, but doesn't necessarily bring Hallmark into Star Trek narrative. But that's partly the point. It's a safe crossover. Low friction, low risk, high resonance. Furthermore, the crossover taps into intergenerational fandom. Parents who started watching Kirk or Picard may now have kids. They might buy a Hallmark ornament to share with their family. Suddenly, a Star Trek memory becomes part of a holiday tradition. The crossover works on multiple emotional levels: nostalgic, familial, ritualistic. As we approach the end of 2025, fans will compare the new line to past favorites. They'll argue whether Guinan is a better addition than Spock, or whether the Titan A surpasses the Enterprise in sculpting. Collectors will assess which edition will appreciate in value. Some limited or exclusive versions will become sought after. That's part of the cycle. That's the cross between sentiment and commerce. To wrap up, this Hallmark Times Star Trek crossover is not a mashup of story universes. It's a fusion of emotional economies. It trades on nostalgia and fandom in everyday spaces, on your tree, in your home, in your memories. It's a soft crossover, but no less powerful. It reminds us that franchises don't only live in narratives. They live in objects, in rituals, in the things we display and remember. In the end, the crossover we're talking about here is really about connection. Hallmark's connection to sentiment and Star Trek's connection to imagination. And the crossover point is the moment you hang a little starship on your tree and think, that's mine, my memory, my fandom. Come back to our channel for all your updates. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel.